Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Depending on wherever you're joining us from, welcome, and I'm so glad you're here. My name is Ifeoluwa, your host for today, and this is Aura, Our Roots and Routes, a multi-generational Black diasporan advocacy platform. And today, we are talking about something that doesn't get nearly enough space: what it means to raise a child in the diaspora, and specifically what it means when that child is neurodivergent and you're doing it far from home. Just a side note, I'm not a parent yet. So I come to this now as someone that has lived it, but as someone who has listened, watched, and read about it. And the more I've listened, the more I've understood that this experience is one of the least spoken about and most deeply felt things in our communities. So this conversation is for every parent who has felt alone in this. You are not alone. And that's what we're here to say. And so before we get into everything, we would like everyone to introduce themselves, where you're joining us from, and what brought you to this conversation today. Does anyone can start?
I can go first. My name is Otito Iwuchukwu, and I'm one of the co-founders of ORAR, actually. So this is a space that is dear to my heart, and I come as a parent of a child on, the ASD spectrum, and also an educator. I guess I would leave those two. I'll just leave those two out there. But yeah.
Okay. Who would like to go next?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I guess I can follow suit as my co-founder did. Hi, for those joining us, my name is Mo, and I'm one of the co-founders of Aura, Our Roots and Routes. And like Dr. Iwuchukwu said, I don't know if yeah, I'm a parent to a child who's suspected to be on the spectrum. We haven't finalized the diagnosis yet, but there've been some signs which we can delve into as we talk. And I wouldn't call myself an educator. I think I'm more of a learner because it's a child that you learn a lot from a child when they when you come in space and proximity with such a child, there's so much lessons you have to learn about being a parent and also how you engage with the extant world. So that's what we're going to bring to the conversation. And I look forward to listening to hear more from our attendees as well. Thank you.
Okay. If you're not able to use like your voice, you can just use the chat room. We just like to know where you're coming from, and we'll brought you to this conversation today. So we'll just give us a bit of time so that we can introduce ourselves. Let's continue. And if any other person joins us, we'll allow them to introduce themselves. So, firstly, before we talk about systems and strategies, I want us to start somewhere more honest, because I believe every parent in this room is carrying something, and most of the time, there isn't a space to say it out loud. So, I would like to know what the emotional side of this journey has looked like for you so far, and what are the hardest things, the hardest parts for you to say out loud. Anyone can go.
You're starting with the hardest question. You're supposed to ease in,
Like it's
you
right.
as a parent, right? Again, it's kind of, yeah. Let me do that easing in. Let me do the easing in. So, there are many circumstances in which people kind of find themselves with a child that is neurodivergent. Sometimes it's your first, sometimes it's not. Like in my own case, it's my second child, right? So the first one is, again, because we talk about neurodivergence as a spectrum, there are different forms of it. So the first one is very what people might call, he can hold himself. Let me just put it that way. He can hold, himself in any room, any conversation, but at home, there's still things that you're just like, this can be normal, right? In sense of just some ADHD tendencies. And they're older. So this is not when you say, well, maybe it's a kid and they'll outgrow it. And no, it's kind of like, how didn't I see this when they were younger? But the younger one from the beginning, it was, many signs of rigid thinking, inflexible, inability to change, tasks like task switching. But it was just that inflexibility. You couldn't do anything with this child. But it's like, okay, is this a thing? Is this not a thing? And I think in my own case, me and my husband actually had an issue about this because my husband was like, there's nothing wrong with him, don't over medicalize a thing that is not a thing. And I said, no, I mean, I don't have to be even in the healthcare space to see that some things are just not there, Uh, and, that's
Last
where,
thing you said was your husband, like, saying
yes,
don't over medicalizing you. Yeah.
yes. And then I said that the kid got into kindergarten, and that's where, our family's joys began, our interactions with the school system, because every day it was one thing or the other, one thing or the other. And then we went into COVID, if I recollect. And I have never been so relieved because I was just like, okay, at least, we can stay home and sort ourselves out. And during COVID, I told them in the school, I said, look, because they kept saying turning things every day, and the child was just so overwhelmed. So we'll sit, do all our work at once for the week, and then just turn it in. So when they kept bothering, like he's not turning in his work, I stepped in. I said, look, he's in kindergarten. Kindergarten is not mandatory. I'm going to tell you. So,
Give them simple work.
I'd rather focus on the one in the fourth grade who is preparing for middle school. So that's how we kind of went through COVID. And then he got into the first grade in COVID, and still it was still again just issues because he likes to show what he knows. That's something with, sometimes kids on the spectrum, they want to really show what they know. And so he'll raise his hands all the time. The teacher wouldn't call him. And he would tell me about this, but I'm like, it's not true. I mean, I didn't really disbelieve him. I just was like, look, it happens. Teachers have a lot of kids. And then one particular day, I just was like, let me sit and observe. She did not know I was observing her throughout the whole day. She never called on this child once. And it was just, raising his hand, raising his hand, raising his hand. So I kind of asked her, I said, what happened here? The same thing. It's like, oh, there are many children. Maybe I didn't see him, all of that. I said, but he actually called you out to you to say he's raising his hand and you didn't even respond, So again, a lot of apologies there and there, but it kind of let me know there are certain interactions in the school that we may not be aware of because this teacher did not know that I was observing them at all. So, I think for me to kind of ease back into the question, that interaction with the external world brings a lot of conflicting feelings because it's almost like they're shining a light on your parenting. So you feel judged, if I could use the word. So that's a big one, from the emotional side things, because you can't avoid that, because they have to interact with the external world. So you can't avoid what I call that reflection back on you as a parent. So that's one that, still dealing with it. I'm not sure that it would ever go away until they become adults, of their own and are able to hold their own. Yeah. Excuse me.
That's you, ma'am. Welcome. I know you said that was I came in hot, but I fear that the second question I'm about to ask might be a bit hotter.
Well, let me add a little bit to that. Sorry. I think Otito was talking. The dynamic between spouses, like one person saying one thing and the other person maybe not saying it yet. I think that was also kind of true. Maybe because of just the nature of my job and having to spend more time with my daughter, it took a while to like be able to see just what was going on until we moved the environment and it was almost like the same script over and over again. And then I had to realize that perhaps that there could be something here that I'm not saying like I was in denial. It's just, and there's a story my child came with, which I'm not gonna disclose on this platform yet. But it was just so many things happening at once. So I wonder even how two parents can have a different version of the child, right? And how that can play into how you seek help or what help would look like. For me, we are a family that have moved around a lot, and I consider that both a blessing for the most part, but it can also be a curse because nothing destabilizes a neurodivergent child than changes, especially when they're used to routines and they're used to familiar faces and having to start all over again. And I'll say that in our daughter's case, she's been a trooper all along because, she just wasn't in Korea for a year. A new language, a new script, she had to go to school, she had to do taekwondo, she had to interface with so many things. And so, but she braved it. The day she was leaving, I had to give her a speech like, I'm so proud of you. You did this, you did this. And that said, though, even some of the patterns that were noticed in her school systems when we were in Nigeria and the US also came up in Korea. And I think when you have those interactions with different entities, I would say the US one was a bit more pervasive because I didn't feel like they really had your child's interest. It was more of, she's a problem and that's it. And labeling child as a problem, which I didn't like, and I think I fought against that. Whereas in Nigeria, it was more like, yes, there's a problem, but when I say problem, that's actually loose. They didn't call it a problem. Yes, she's different, but it's okay. We can handle it. We just, if I felt like I learned additional parenting tips from the Nigerian entities, so much so that when I went back to the US, I felt more confident to advocate for my child better. So I think that also adds a nuance of cross-cultural parenting. And then I think the last thing I'll say about the emotional part of it is just, again, being Nigerian American, there's this, I would say, this extra caution you have to carry around in moving around spaces. Even here in Korea, and I know Korea is kind of different, they give a lot of grace, oodles of it to foreigners. But I didn't consider myself a foreigner in Korea. I speak the language, so I knew what to do. I know how to contain my child, especially in public spaces. And I'll have a lot of Koreans telling me, let her be, it's fine. She's too young. They'll even tell me, you're being too much, just let her be. But in America, I felt like they didn't like, kids are not really allowed to be in spaces, allowed to be kids. You're supposed to almost, if your kid doesn't fall into it, they kind of give you that look of, oh, you must be a bad parent. And as a Nigerian, you already carry enough shame, and you know how you see your child as an extension of you. So those cross-cultural shame and guilt, like, why is my child not, quote unquote, normal? Or why do I have to carry this extra sense of care around the world and cushion some of the excesses that might come with them interacting with public people in public spaces? I think that would be the hardest one.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mo. I was actually going to ask about like the guilt and the shame. Oh, there's something in the chat.
Oh.
Okay. Let me just read out what Mr. Taiwo, I believe, said. Okay. So he said, as a parent to a possibly neurodivergent kid, I wanted to join you to support and learn. We've been having signs but pending a formal evaluation from doctors, wanting to be armed with enough information to be able to parent her effectively and navigate the school system successfully, and hopefully raise a well-rounded child. We're exploring other things and factors like Mo mentioned that could possibly have contributed to the signs we've seen: sleep patterns, changes in regular routine, etc. Okay. Yes. Dr. Moon mentioned something earlier when you said about transition and moving between schools and countries like you've done from Nigeria to US to Korea. So I want to ask, in between all these transitions, what do you think has actually helped as you moved? And looking back to the first transition you made with your daughter, what do you wish that you did differently that you think might have helped a bit more to help us settle in?
You had so many questions there. Can you ask them? So what has helped with the transition? And what did I wish I knew?
Yes.
I think one is as a parent, because of maybe the nature of the vertical hierarchy, the vertical hierarchy that exists between you as a parent and your child, you tend to see them as somebody you have to protect all the time. But I didn't really take into consideration that she had her own agency and she was allowed to do that. I didn't have to really stress myself so much to, have to cover for everything and, fill in the gaps. I had to learn that, just let her be and let her figure it. Even if she makes mistakes, let her figure it out. Let her adjust.
Yeah.
And I almost like I didn't trust her to behave well, as it were. And if I'll
Yeah.
go back again, especially when I moved to Korea, I think I'll have just been a little bit easy on her. It didn't dawn on me until maybe the last few weeks that when she just left Korea, I had gone to she loves taekwondo every day. I'd gone to her taekwondo school and I just saw her in her element and I just realized, my God, she has a world that I hadn't had access to. Like this is a girl that has a whole world, her own, friends and her way of moving around the world. And why did I think that I have to be the one always, filling in the gaps, always protecting her? So that's one thing I wish I had known. Things that have helped, I think, is communicating expectations. Again, kids like this, they want to know. My daughter will ask you why. And sometimes it comes up as talking back. She wants to know why you're doing what you're doing. And again, the Nigerian in me goes, because I said so. That's why. But then that doesn't always work. You have to explain why
Yes.
you're doing what you're doing. And I've had to swallow my pride as I'm an African mother. If I tell you to do something, you do it. And bring her along. I think that's one. And also activities, things that would help them. My daughter requires physical activity, and swimming was it for us and gymnastics. Well, I moved to a country where they don't have a lot of pools here because of, restricted land use. So the next best thing was taekwondo. And when I even went to see her, I'm like, this is like work. It doesn't look relaxing, but she loves it. If I dropped out of that, I would have had to find a way to make up for that energy that was because she's very active. So I think knowing your child, knowing where they will thrive, and helping them also gain confidence in themselves. And they're quick to know that people might find them exhausting. My daughter has said, she's made statements like, there's something wrong with my brain. I think my brain is broken. Imagine your
Oh,
6-year-old telling you that. It's like, where did you hear that from? And having to work out back, like, there's nothing wrong with your brain. You move fast. It's okay. You see the world differently. So it's things like that. You're almost like you're running against time to save your child from the world, who might, whom the world that might not necessarily have a space for people like her. And again, being female, as you know, statistically, this kind of diagnoses are less diagnosed in females because female kids are known to mask a lot and overcompensate. So yeah, I would say those are some of the things that has helped with the transition, like communicating expectations, giving more grace to myself and also to her. And what I wish I had known was maybe trusted her more, within the confines of being a child, but trusted her more that should adjust and it might take time, it might take a lot of trials and errors, but let her walk at her pace. But that came with a lot of baggage being Nigerian American. So.
thank you very much for that, Dr. Mo. Okay, so anyone like to add how you've been able to manage transitioning with your child?
So it's interesting you asked this because we also moved, right? We also moved countries. And for which I'm thankful that you had a country to move to, right? In that sense, I guess that's what comes from being a bicultural mother. Like if all else fails, you go back to your village. So we also moved because the pressure in 2022 was just unbearable for me, just within the school system. So I said, you know what, I'm going to pull them out and take them back to Nigeria and just for them to test out the school system. It was also a sociological experiment for me because I wanted to see the way that I went to school, right? All of those things that I knew, putting them within, a system there. Would anything be different, at least for this child? I wanted to kind of see. And honestly it was, and what was the thing? It was community. I think Dr. Mo had alluded to that. Community, because, first of all, you're paying a lot of money for these schools. So you have to kind of, not get your money's worth, but they want you to be happy. And so from that perspective, the teachers are almost like trained to take care of the children, right? So there was a level of care that just was not evident in the US school system for me and, for our family. And so, that's that level of support, it kind of just made okay, I'm not crazy. People can actually take care of this child and not make it seem like it's a problem. And so that was it. And Nigeria being what it is, they had put him in a higher grade and he excelled. So when we came back, he actually had to go back down a grade. But it's okay. I didn't have any issues with that at all. But I remember that was just the biggest one for me, the community, just having people who were willing to take care of the child and who would even kind of laugh at his foibles. Like they weren't looking at it like a problem. It's like, oh, this child is so rigid, and everybody would tickle and they'll laugh. So they even helped him almost like come out of his own shell in that sense, because at that point, again, I think just that whole you're a problem, you're a problem, you're a problem from the school had probably like started to seep in. So I'm glad that there was that interruption very early enough for me to be able to see two sides, because I feel like I, as a parent too, could have internalized all of the faults, right, as it were, that was being tried to place on us. So if I hadn't seen this whole thing, I would not have known that there was another alternative. Obviously, I say this with care, knowing that not everybody can pull their child out and, take them to another country. But I know this is also why sometimes parents pull their children out and then homeschool them. That is still a change of environment. And they have to get used to the transitions. Because, when we were here, he was a child, again, anxiety, I guess. So he'll always be in the nurse's office, my stomach, my head, my this, my that. And then they'll call you, come and take him, At some point, I had to call the principal. I said, the nurse is actually enabling malingering. Like, there has to be a balance, You can't just be calling us for everything. I put a child on the bus in the morning. He gets to school. He say, come and pick him. He said his stomach is paining him. I'm like, so, but then for the whole time we were in Nigeria, I did not get a single call from a nurse. So I actually thought, maybe he's better everything. But then when I went to pick up his things on the last day, the people in the clinic, they were like, oh, you're Mrs. XYZ. I said, yes. They're like, oh, your son is so funny that he's always here, for one thing or the other, but that we will cuddle him. She was like, we'll just pat him on the back and send him back. But if it was something serious, maybe, he had a cut, we'll put a band-aid. So I said, really? And I said, why didn't you call me? She was like, call you? To her, it was a strange thing. Like, why are we calling you? That's what we're here for. And I tell you, I cried. I did, because even thinking about it now, I was like, you mean it's possible? It was just for me, the possibility, like, are you kidding? I'm telling you, this was the last day of school. So it's not like it was in the middle of the school and I'm saying whatever. I'm thinking, I can't even believe this. So when I came back, I was actually a little bit even more stricter with the nurse. I said, dare you not call me unless the child is bleeding out on things. So, I mean, it was just like that whole thing of pushing the burden back on you. I just, that was the toughest, and it still is, but at least I feel like just seeing that difference made me believe in a lot of things. It made me believe in multiple possibilities, which sometimes that's what you need to see as a parent, to say, look, sometimes it's not about you or your child. Not saying that, neurodivergence is not a thing, not saying that the spectrum is not, a spectrum for what it is. Some people have it light, some people have it really heavy, because I have a nephew who's completely nonverbal. So I know what that looks like on both sides. But at the same time, when you have people who support you, who realize, the child did nothing to deserve this, right? It makes the whole journey lighter. It does.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Otito. Okay. So there's also one thing I would like to ask. Dr. Mo and Dr. Otito both mentioned it as I'd like to know what the impact of having a neurodivergent child has had on like the family. I know both of you have more than one child. So has it been like sibling with the father, or maybe even extended family at this point?
So I guess I can go. I can speak from the perspective of the child being the second and then the older. In Dr. Mo's case, it might be reverse, yeah. So, I mean, in our own case, because of all the attention, because that's really what it is, you're kind of focused on the child and trying to get them stabilized. The other child might feel left out, right? And he let us hear it. He's like, in this house is always brother, brother, brother. Nobody cares about me, and we had to sit down, and I reminded him. I said, you were here for a good 3.5 years before he came. I don't expect you to remember, but you were completely and thoroughly spoiled by all the grandparents. He didn't even get that opportunity because by the time he was, you know, there, some of the grandparents had passed away, so like you should recognize that you may not be able to see, but recognize that a lot of, love and care was poured into you before he came. And nobody's ignoring you. It's just, if the school calls, we have to go, or, we have to kind of make sure that we're teaching him skills. And sometimes those teaching skills can look like you're focusing on the child, but you can hold your own. So we have to have that conversation. But there's always that. I feel like I don't think that can ever go away. And that's another thing. It's almost like I had to speak to myself to say that is his reality. It's not true, definitely, but I can't keep trying to change his reality. Then it makes it seem like something is wrong. In my mind, it's like, let's all just get used to the dynamic, because it's not like, I'm favoring one child over the other. It's just because of all of these things, we have to spend time. So I even had to teach him to say, look, because they'll argue a lot. And he's like, why can't he just say that this is so? I said, so we had to go through the whole thing of rigid thinking and just saying, you trying to tell him something is different. You can't do it with repetition, because you just get, very like upset. You have to just let it go and then come back. But you see, this is where I think the ADHD tendencies tend to, clash, because each of them wants to prove that they're right and all that. So we had to go over and over that to say, look, just, be mindful that the person does have a different way of thinking, right? I always just never say they have a problem. It's always they have a different way of thinking, they have a different way of looking at the world, and you have to be aware, right? I cannot let you go out into the world not being aware of this and thinking that, he's just trying to foment trouble for you. So that's something we've had to talk about. But I still feel as a mother that thing is there, just the residual thing of, oh, a lot of time is being spent on my brother. And I think that's typically going to be the thing with many families, other families that I've seen, not really talked about it, but I can see all the care, and time being taken on the neurodivergent child and the other child being left in the corner. And so observing that is just for me saying, not going to let that happen as best as I can. But I'll tell you something funny that happened was with the older son, when I said, okay, all of these things happens. Let's go, let's go on a mother-son date, just you and I. And it was like, no, we have to bring my brother. And I burst out laughing. I'm like, okay, I guess that's not gonna work. Let's just move on to something else. He refused completely. So many times I tried this. He's like, no. But now that he's older, now he wants to do it. So now I'm like, okay, I feel like sometimes children are ready when they are, right? I can't keep forcing strategies because that's what people, are saying you should do, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
For your audience. Yeah, yeah. I can just add to that, like, my husband is in the chat. I'm just gonna echo what he said.
Yeah.
So our daughter is 7. She just turned 7, and we have a 1-year-old. So you can imagine the gap. So for almost 7 years, she was the whole world, and when we had the second one, everything shifted, and we watched her feel that shift in ways she couldn't always do. I mean, I'd read the books, nothing really prepares you for that season in primary, especially when your child already processes the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, it's also a realization of everything she thought was certain. Like, she was a whole universe. And I was the one that was there full time. My work is flexible. I spend more time with her. I know everything about her. And my husband was coming in and out as much as, we tried to bridge that with calls, with, intentional visit and reassurance. But there were days where I could see her looking for something I couldn't fully give her on my own, and we were always deliberate about telling her out loud, like regularly. your love. If I always ask her, who's my favorite girl in the world? I'll tell her, she'll say me. Who's my favorite boy in the world? She mentioned her brother. And sometimes she will say, Mom, I'm jealous. She said it many times. Mom, I'm jealous. You're spending more time with Iowade. She'll mention his name. And I will have to remind her, like, can he wash his butt when he after pooping? No. Can he open the door? No. Can he go to the park by himself? No. He needs help. So, involve her in helping. And I think children need to just hear it more than often. And my friend told me something. It's like her being able to name those feelings. Like I feel jealous. She feels safe telling me about it. I'm like, okay, but I won't like to. The first time I heard it, I felt like, am I doing something wrong? Like for her to say she feels jealous. And I think also being here in Korea, to add to what Dr. Otito said earlier on about community, I'm a community person. Like no matter where I go, put me in prison, God forbid I've never been in prison. I will find community there. Like I can never do life alone. So what I had to do in Korea was to mimic some of the life we had in the US, like family, godparents, and all of that. So our church community was there, my friends, Korean friends were there. I also had to pay for a nanny. Now I know that's like a privilege I have to be able to pay for a nanny, but that nanny became like a deputy mom for me. Whereas on the weekends when I didn't have I mean, I don't know Korea very well, someone just moved here. My nanny would take my child to a kids cafe. If you live in Korea long enough, you know that there aren't many spaces for kids to go around. You have to go to a kids cafe, because the parks are limited and all that. So she would take my daughter to places where I didn't have time to go, and she became like the deputy mom. And because she also would take my child to their family home where she lived. And she was the youngest there, so everybody doted on her. And I really loved going to that house because she was like the baby all over again. She didn't have to share attention with her brother. And they would do, facial skincare, they would make their nails, and she loved it. So it's things like that, is knowing what your child will try. But finally will be homeschooling. So she goes to a Korean school. My goal for that was just our goal for that was just socialization. It wasn't more of the educational piece because of the language component, and I knew this was not a permanent gig. So what I had to take upon myself was to homeschool, which I would never do in my life. Okay. I'm putting it on record. If you ever hear me say I want to be a homeschool mom, please just send a sniper my way because that's not me. I have been cloned by AI. That was a journey of its own. I think for parents like me, this should be a conflict of interest to never teach your kid because you see them. It's not just them; it's also the learning challenges that. I don't know how to teach kids. The problem was me. It wasn't the child. It was me. Okay, the child is good. There's nothing wrong with it. Was me. I just didn't have the patience, and so yeah, it was just very difficult. So I guess all told is, our family has been stretched, but it's also been shaped, and I think that is just the truest thing I can say about it. But I have such a deep level of respect and joy towards my child because, man, despite what the world says and how the world wants to label her, she's just someone that would never, bow to that, and that for me leaves me in awe of her all the time. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Mo. So I'd like to throw another question to the room. Dr. Otito said something about the school calling her and having her to stand her ground. So I want to ask, what was the first time that you really had to advocate for your child in school? Because now we're talking about in school because there's just no way you're not going to take your child to school. So what was that like? The first time you had to advocate for your child in school?
Yeah, I would say that I learned from Otito. I learned from Otito. There's sometimes you can't just keep quiet. You hear something, you call them up right away.
Yeah. Yep.
For me, it was the first day of school. So background, our daughter was in private daycare for 4 years, and then we're excited to put her in kindergarten. Well, at the 5-year-old, everyone is excited. Everything bling bling, new shoes, new bag, new folder. Tell me why. Before her name even was dried on the register, we got an email from the teacher. First day of school on Thursday. Hello, my name is blah blah blah. Your daughter isn't staying well in school. I think she's not adjusting well. Imagine as a Nigerian American, your first time sending your child to public school. For me, it was almost like the way I read that message was, people have rushed him to the school. Your child doesn't belong here. I'm like 5-year-olds. So imagine just how she showed her cards. How do you think I would trust her leadership as a teacher to look after the well-being of my teacher, of my child? So to say that we never got on the right track till she finished that class. I mean, because I didn't trust her anymore after she did that. And every time I would see her email pop up, the anxiety. And I think we can also talk about the emotional labor moms face. I mean, husbands can be great, but moms, like, there's just this, you carry everything. There's that additional layer of stress when the email pops up, what you have to attend to, what you have to address. And then the other time, a teacher made a comment to my babysitter, like, "Oh, bless your heart." Hey, I called her, about my child, like, she's such a handful, something like that. And they were saying in front of my child, in front of babysitter. I had to call the meeting. Turned out they had used one information we had provided to them as a way to label her. And we had to call them out on that bias. Like, you cannot be making assumptions. If you have questions, ask us, right?
Ask us.
So yeah, there have been so many, even some other disgusting things I can't even get on here. But the bias is real, whether you want to agree to it or not. And if you as a parent are not taking that time to get to know what the school system is like and advocate for your child, you can do more harm to your child, And these children can tell when they're not wanted in spaces. They can tell when adults are irritated or they've read them as, this person is a problem child. And if I can have to get rid of my discomfort and swallow I don't like appearing in front of teachers. There's that thing about being a Nigerian where you don't want to talk to authorities. But I've had to put that aside. I'm like, no, guns are blazing. You cannot do that to my child. So yeah. And then I would say Otito has been one of my yeah. I love this brand girl. She's been one of my supporters and all of that. So she has a good template, like what to follow to the letter. So yeah.
So it's interesting because I saw something the other day and they had called out the woman and just saying that she needed to be fired. And I actually agreed. It was a special ed teacher. So the mother of the child said his jackets, he had it on in the morning. He didn't, come back with it. So she texted the teacher to say, did the child have his jacket? She's like, no, he didn't have it, So she said, okay, thank you. I'll check with the boss. Now, this teacher did not know that maybe she had voice to text or she was trying to text somebody else. But the classic faux pas. She sent the message to the mother of this child talking about scum parents with a scum child that I'm telling you, like the thing broke my heart, that they are never thankful for everything you do for their children. And that this particular woman, this is how she is. Meanwhile, the woman thanked her in the email to say thank you and just moved on, to say they're never grateful and all of that. And so the rallying cry in the thread was, why are you in education? And this is the question I always have. I can be a bit merciless when it comes to that because I know my limits, I would say, right? I kind of know my limits. Obviously, I'm still finding them out as I go along. But if something is not working for me, I should not be subjecting people to my own bias, to my own, whatever, and I get it. People have to work, but I feel like there are so many other places you can work. You can go work, in hospital, like so many other places you can work as, outside of like this negative energy you're bringing into people's children. So for me, that's, when I read that, I was like, oh, because to me, that's the same mindset to say, if you're not going to be a good educator, you feel like you've lost it, you've burnt out, then please bow out, right? Because I think, and I come back to that culture of care. I think that many times there's so much transactionality in the school system. You don't realize people are entrusting their children to you, right? And so the thing that, Dr. Mo said about how she couldn't trust that teacher anymore, it's true. I mean, the very first day of school, that means that you couldn't even, in my mind, hide your bias or hide whatever it was. It's like, oh, this kid, different in all ramifications. And I just have to not rile, but almost like make the parents feel what I'm feeling or whatever, And to me, I just think that's not nice. Obviously, that also brings me to the question of how I live in New Jersey. They have a tenure system, right? My child's school, both of them went to the school. They don't have a single teacher of color. One single. I'm not even talking about percentages. The one Indian woman that was there, then people complained about her accent, and she was sent to another, to another role because she was assisting when the teachers had to go on leave or things like that. And she was a lovely woman, lovely. And that's what I mean by culture of care, because when she was done with my child, she sent us a message saying she really appreciated teaching our child, and helping him walk through his challenges. I still have that notes because I just feel like this is how you should make parents feel, to say, yes, there are challenges, but we're all kind of working through it, or we're in this together. And so for me, the first time was with the school psychologist, the woman who is supposed to be the person, who knows about this, when she had called and basically blindsided me, brought the whole child study team and almost like forcing a meeting. I said, you cannot force me to go find the diagnosis if I'm not ready. So let's get that clear. And I'm not going until he turns 8. Don't ask me why, but for me, it's a developmental stage, right? I can't be rushing a child for diagnosis when, I don't think that it's that serious. I said, look, I have children with different levels of autism around me. And so I know, right? So then this was again right before COVID, because I said, when she kept calling me, I said to her, I said, you know what, can we switch his classroom? And she said, oh, that's not going to work. I said, excuse me, what do you mean by it's not going to work? She said, oh, I've been doing this job for 46 years. I remember her saying those words. And I remember thinking in my mind, maybe that's the problem. I didn't say that to her, but I remember thinking that is a problem because you're applying the principles from 46 years ago. That means you were doing this work before I was even born. You're applying those principles to children of today. And I said to her, I said, that I am his mother. And she said, it's not going to work. I've seen children like this. I said, what do you mean? Then she backtracked. I said, I'm his mother. I'm ready to take the charge. She said, we can't change in the middle of the school year. I said, we can. And that's what I mean by telling people advocacy. Because you can. You can change your child's teacher the day before the last day of school. It's a public school, I said we can and we will. Talking about how, the teacher is the best teacher in the district and this and that. I said, I didn't say she was a bad teacher. You're putting words into my mouth. I did not say that. I'm just saying she may not be the best teacher for the child. Don't confuse it. And so I'm ready for him to go to another classroom. If we keep seeing the same things, then perhaps, it was interesting because the next week COVID hit. But now that I've looked back on the system, I think he might have still had issues because this same woman would have gone to tell the teacher that he's a problem child. This is how they perpetuate the bias in my mind. Right. And so then, I said to her, I said, this child, you have called me about him so many times, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the fact that, you're helping him walk through his feelings and whatever. I said, but I have never, and I said that to her, and she, you could tell on the phone that she was almost about to burst into tears. I said, I have never heard you say a positive word about this child. And you are the psychologist, right? You are the people that tell us about fixed mindset and growth mindset. And I said, from your actions, right? It's showing me. I didn't say it was. This is how I couch my words. I said, it seems like you have a fixed mindset towards this child. And she was like, no, how can I say that? Blah, 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 blah. I said, you know what? Let's not continue over the phone. Let's meet in person. But I took that whole conversation and I put it back in an email to say, here's what you called me to say about the child and this and this and this. And therefore, I feel like we need to meet again with the child study team. So many meetings on. But the child study team, you could tell that they were like, what's the problem? I feel like in their minds, they're like, we've seen children that are need more help, need more whatever. So why all of this fuss about this one child? I can't tell you, but I think, all of that again, I think demographic dynamics come into play because these people, I also had to say to them, I told the principal, because the principal then changed, thankfully, to a man, interestingly, and the man was like, look, when I was a child, I was labeled with ADHD, so these children are not a problem. That's kind of, he all told us, he was like, they'll make it, that's his own goal, to get children to make it. And I remember telling him, I said, you are okay. I mean, I didn't say that in those words, but your teachers, your staff, they need cultural competence training, because that I'm raising my child differently doesn't make it bad. It just makes it different. And here's the thing, if this child gets into trouble, I'm the one they're still going to come and call, right? You can't tell me what is too strict. You can't tell me what is too like severe, because again, you give information, they use it against you. Because I was telling them that during the summer, my children work, not work of manual labor, but they do like school work, because I didn't want the summer slump. I said, when we wake up, they have breakfast for about 3 hours, we're doing lessons. And it was like, oh, let children be children, basically trying to tell me that I was overdoing it. And I was like, no, you can't tell me, because they're my children, right? Like, when the summer slump hits, guess who will get sent the letter saying they're not, meeting up in school? And besides, when you tell me about how bright and intelligent they are, do you think that this just comes out of thin air? We work on things kind of like every day. But it was just that back and forth with the school psychologist. And I'm going to tell you, it's not like things got any better. She just left. She just upped and left. I guess, after almost 50 years on the job, you just decide to retire one day. And then the newer lady who was younger, with more modern approaches, we didn't have any issues with her. So this is what I keep saying, that sometimes it's just the person there that can be like the barrier and make you feel like, you're the worst parents in the world. But we walk through that. For my son's school, I think so many things just came into play: a new teacher, a new principal, and a new psychologist. Can you imagine? So all of the old ways got swept away in, like a personal tsunami. And that really helps again, so that brings you back to the individual and the community that you as a parent and the child are in as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Otito. Because we're in a crunch for time,
Yep.
I want to ask a question. When you said something about during summer giving them tasks to do, so I want to ask: do you like set like goals for them to do? Is it like personal goals that you set? Is it formally or informally, or like yeah, just like you and your
No,
partner?
very, very informal, because I don't know if you heard Dr. Mo say, one of the things that you want to almost like get children to have is that buy-in, right? You want them to have a sense of autonomy. So you never want to make it feel like, oh, you're forcing them, to do things. Some things are without contention, like they know we're going to do work in the summer, but at some point it's like, if you want to do it at 10, if you want to do it at 9, just get it done before you move on to the next thing, right? So that allowed them a little bit of, oh, I'm not constrained to a seat for X hours until. So what you try to do is kind of get their buy-in, but it's always quite informal, right? We go to summer camp. And again, the reason is because of that activity thing, right? She was saying so many things that I kept nodding my head, because you want to keep them active, even more than the average, child in that sense. Because if they're not doing it, then their brain gets into this rut of, boredom. And that's the thing about ADHD. When they're telling you they're bored there, but they're not just saying it. Like, boredom is it's kind of like a thing, right? Because the brain is always craving for the dopamine that it kind of lacks, compared to the average neurotypical brain. And so they will always want to keep doing things. And so the key is to find what are the things that they like, or the things that you can get them to stay committed to, and have their buy-in as well. So that would be, for me, one of the things. But we don't do slothful summer. No. That doesn't happen in our household. Yeah, so my older son, he's aged out of the summer camp, but he's now going back as a camp counselor. It's like they're gonna see you until you get to college, so yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, ma.
Yeah. I was going to add that I saw if you move around a lot, you begin to see a lot of gaps in the system. And I was thinking of it one day, if I will have my way, like where I feel like my child would thrive most is the Nigerian teacher, right? Like when Dr. Otito was talking about her experience, I had the same experience, even though we're at different schools, different parts of Lagos. Like you go sometimes to pick her up and you be expecting them to tell you all the things she did that were wrong. I was like, no, she was fine. She was okay. I was like, Not one day they ever. In fact, they called me one time, and my heart said, "Well, kilo to shape. What has this girl even done?" They're just calling to ask about food allergies because we paid for lunch, and that's about the only time we got a call. In fact, our teacher still asks about her, like, how's she doing? We miss her so much. So I want that Nigerian teacher, the one who knows your name, they know your mother, they follow you home with their eyes, they take your success personally. That relational intensity, I see you as a whole child energy. That's really irreplaceable. Then also want the systems from the US, right? The structured accommodations, the IEP, the technology, where they can track what's working, what's not working. And so I'll say that a system for me would be, having those two things, but you rarely find that, right? You rarely find that. And I would say if you could, because you have to fight for the relationship on one side and the resources on the other. So I'll tell the parents what to look for. I say find the teacher first, which is what I wanted to say, driving Dr. Those points. You know your mother, you know your child better than the system. Now the system they might know the rules, they might, know all of that, but you know your child better. And you both need each other, like the system and you as a parent, but don't go in there like you don't know anything, right? And then one would be, okay, know your child's stories. What are their patterns, their triggers, their wins, the specific moments. You are the only person in that room who has that. And before you go in for those meetings, write your concerns down, your questions, your non-negotiable. Because when you get there, it might be overwhelming. Sometimes it might bring in 8 people into the meeting. This is the counselor, this is the school psychologist, the school blah 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 blah. And you're probably the only one, or maybe two, showing up in the midst of these experts and quotes. But you have a reason to be there. So slow the meeting down. You're allowed to say, please, can you explain that? You're allowed to say, I need to think about this before I agree. You don't have to decide anything now. And then fourth, when you feel dismissed, stay calm, go home, document what happened, and come back prepared. And next time you bring somebody home with you, I've had to show up with so our child is half white, half black. I've had to show up with a white person, to be able to drive home some points. And she's culturally competent enough to, this is our daughter's godmother, Gigi. She's able to use their language to say and call them out on their bias. Like, you said this about this person. Was it what you meant?
Yeah.
And again, when you go into those rooms, know what your non-negotiables are. And after you're done with the meeting, document. That's what I'm gonna say to wrap up my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, the strategies part is a whole conversation altogether, right? With, tools, resources, and Aura. We're developing a toolkit just for this because it's almost like, if two of us could go through this in two different states, two very different states. So it tells you something about, the educational systems. And honestly, you cannot, when you think about systems, you cannot try to, in my mind, change the system entirely. It's impossible. But what can you do in your own little way to make sure that your child is thriving? And so for me, that's the biggest part of it, right? Because there are some things you can't avoid. It's just almost like comes with the territory, but for every good day, you're thankful, right? Every week or month, you don't get a report, you're thankful. And then, be proactive about it. But I honestly feel like that conversation should be another conversation for another day, right? That's what we're doing here at Dora. We're just sitting down in community and saying, what are the things that have worked for you? This is how this, happened to me. So hearing people say me too, even though the term me too is
I know, right? The other
interesting, but that honestly, that whole idea of hearing me too, like this happened to me too, this is what I did and all, there's nothing quite like it, especially on this parenting journey, because again, it's a job that is lifelong. It's the one lifelong job that we have, right? No matter how well we're doing in other parts of our career, and we want to be able to do well at the end of it. So that's the reason, part of the reason that we formed ORAR, to give voice to, those of us who are raising children in diaspora or raising children in different systems, right? Cultural systems, because diaspora is basically just you're living in a different cultural system that you were raised, which could come in very many forms. So, we recognize that and we're mindful of that. So thank you for joining us for this hour. We didn't hear Miss Sheila's voice, but I hope you got something out of this. And if you need anything, just let us know, right? We'll be happy to support you as best we can.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. And just as Dr. Otito said, we'll be getting resources from the conversation, so you can always come back to them. So you can listen to the recording on Spotify and YouTube, and follow us on Instagram for every other thing that would come up in between to stay connected. So we want you to know that this room and ORAR is for you, irrespective of whatever brought you here today. So thank you very much. We are our roots and routes. We honor our belonging, one story, many routes. So please, we'll be looking forward to your questions and any other thing that you have. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Tita. Thank you, Dr. Mo. Thank you, Mr. Taiwo, for joining us. Thank you, Sheila.
All right. Thank you.